The moment I saw the weapon rise above the crowd, my body moved before my mind could even form a warning. There was no time to shout, no time to think about rules, treaties, or the fact that I was not even supposed to be standing that close to the throne. All I saw was a flash of metal, a shape aiming at a young prince who had no idea death was one breath away from him. And then I was moving, throwing myself into the space between the weapon and his chest. The blast hit me instead of him. Pain does strange things to time. It stretches seconds into minutes and then crushes minutes into nothing at all. I remember falling. I remember the cold stone floor beneath me and the sound of hundreds of voices gasping at once. A sound so loud it felt like the walls of the palace were breathing. I remember a face leaning over mine, gold eyes wide with shock, lips moving in a language I had spent years learning to understand. My name is Daniel Whitmore. 2 years ago, if you had told me I would end up lying on the floor of an alien throne room with a wound in my chest, I would have laughed and asked what you had been drinking. I was a language specialist, nothing more. I studied patterns in speech, translated words between worlds, and stayed far away from anything resembling danger. That was the job. Watch, listen, translate, stay silent, stay safe. But safety is a strange promise when your job puts you in the middle of a royal court that is quietly falling apart from the inside. The Syndral Dominion had reached out to Earth 18 months earlier, offering trade routes, shared technology, and a fragile peace after decades of silence between our worlds. I was assigned to the delegation because I had spent years cracking their language before anyone else on our side had managed more than a few broken phrases. It was supposed to be simple. Learn the customs, translate the treaties, keep my head down. Nobody warned me that beneath the golden halls and ceremonial robes of the Syndral court, a war for the throne had already begun, quiet and merciless, hidden behind smiles and formal bows. Prince Veltarn was the second son of the ruling family, young by Syndral standards, still learning the weight of the crown that would one day sit on his head. He was curious about Earth in a way none of the older nobles were. He asked me questions about human music, human food, the strange human habit of laughing when nothing funny had happened. He butchered my language on purpose sometimes just to make me laugh, and somewhere between the treaty meetings and the long nights practicing pronunciation, I stopped thinking of him as an assignment and started thinking of him as someone I did not want to see hurt. His older brother, Prince Sarath, saw things differently. Sarath believed the alliance with Earth was weakness dressed up as diplomacy. He believed the throne belonged to strength alone, and in his eyes, a prince who spent his evenings learning human jokes was not fit to rule anything. I did not know the full truth of what Sarath had been planning until the coronation ceremony, when the weapon rose above the crowd and pointed itself at his own brother's chest. I did not have time to consider any of this while I was falling. All I felt was fire spreading through my shoulder and down my arm, a burning so complete it seemed to erase every other thought in my head. Somewhere above me, I heard Veltarn shouting orders in a voice that cracked between fear and fury, calling for the palace guards, calling for the healers, calling my name in broken human words he must have practiced without me knowing. Then came the silence. It was not the silence of shock. I understood that much, even through the pain. It was a different kind of silence, heavier, older, the kind that settles over a room when everyone present suddenly realizes they are witnessing something they have never seen before. I later learned that 400 nobles, guards, and members of the royal court had all, in the same breath, dropped to their knees on the cold stone floor. I did not understand why until much later. The healers reached me quickly enough that the wound did not take my life, though it came closer than I like to admit. I remember drifting in and out of awareness as they carried me through corridors lined with statues of past rulers, their stone eyes watching me pass. I remember the strange, cool feeling of Syndral medicine working through my blood, faster and stranger than anything human doctors could offer. And I remember waking up inside a chamber filled with soft blue light, my shoulder wrapped in something that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Veltarn was sitting beside me when I opened my eyes, still wearing his ceremonial robes, though they were wrinkled now, as if he had refused to change out of them since the attack. His gold eyes were red-rimmed, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. "You should not have done that," he finally said, his voice rough. "You should not have been standing in front of an assassin," I answered, my throat dry and aching. He almost laughed, though it came out broken. somewhere between relief and disbelief. Then his expression turned serious, in a way I had not seen from him before, older somehow, as if the events of that day had aged him years in a single afternoon. "Do you understand what you did?" he asked. I told him honestly that I did not. I had not thought about consequences or customs in the half-second before I moved. I had only seen a boy about to lose his life, and realized I was close enough to stop it. What he told me next changed everything I thought I understood about the Sindral people. Among his kind, every act of loyalty carries weight, but that weight always flows in one direction, upward, from servant to master, from soldier to commander, from citizen to crown. Guards protect princes because oaths bind them from birth. Soldiers die for kings because duty demands it, not because they choose it freely. In 3,000 years of recorded history, no Sindral had ever given their life for another without the pressure of blood, oath, or law forcing their hand. I was not bound by any of that. I owed him nothing. No oath tied me to his family, no law commanded my loyalty, no punishment waited for me if I had simply stepped aside and let the weapon find its mark. And yet I had moved anyway, without command, without obligation, expecting nothing in return. The Sindral had a phrase for what I had done, though it had never before applied to a living person. They called it the sacrifice of the unbound, an act so rare in their history that it existed only in old stories, carved into temple walls and painted onto ceremonial banners depicting legends from before written history began. It was the reason the throne room had fallen to its knees. It was the reason guards who had trained their entire lives to protect the royal family suddenly found themselves kneeling before a foreign translator who owed their prince nothing at all. I told Veltarn I did not feel like a legend. I felt like a man with a burning shoulder and a headache that refused to fade. He laughed properly this time, and for a moment, the heaviness in the room lifted, replaced by something lighter, something closer to friendship than diplomacy. But peace did not last long inside those palace walls. Word of the attempted attack spread through the court faster than any healer could work, and with it came fear, suspicion, and whispered accusations. Sarath denied any involvement, of course, standing before the council with practiced calm, claiming the assassin had acted alone, driven by radical beliefs that had nothing to do with him. Some of the older nobles believed him. Others did not, though few dared to speak against a prince with as much influence as Sarath commanded. I healed slowly over the following weeks, spending my days confined to quiet chambers, while Sindral physicians monitored the wound with quiet efficiency. Veltarn visited often, sometimes with questions about Earth, sometimes simply to sit in silence beside me, as if reassuring himself that I was still breathing. During one of those visits, a woman named Clara Whitfield arrived from the human delegation, sent to check on my condition and report back to Earth's council. Clara had a sharp mind and an even sharper way of asking questions that made people forget they had not meant to answer honestly. She listened carefully as I explained everything that had happened, her expression growing more serious with every detail. "You realize this changes the entire treaty negotiation," she said finally. "Every noble in that court now sees humans differently. They do not just see us as trade partners anymore. They see us as something almost sacred." I told her I had not meant to change anything. I had only meant to stop a young man from dying in front of his own court on the day he was meant to receive his crown. "Intentions rarely matter once history starts writing itself," she replied. "What matters now is what happens next." What happened next came faster than any of us expected. 3 nights after Clara's visit, I woke to the sound of muffled voices arguing somewhere beyond my chamber door. I recognized Veltarn's voice immediately, along with another voice I did not know, low and controlled, speaking in tones meant to persuade rather than threaten. Curiosity pulled me from the bed despite the ache still lingering in my shoulder, and I moved quietly toward the door to listen. The second voice belonged to a Sindral officer named Doran Vex, a member of the palace guard whose loyalty had, until that moment, never been questioned. He was urging Veltarn to abandon the human alliance entirely, warning that Sarath's supporters were growing bolder by the day, and that continued closeness with Earth would only give them more reasons to challenge his claim to the throne. Veltarn refused, his voice steady, despite clear exhaustion. "The alliance stays. Whatever risk it brings, I will not abandon it out of fear." Doran's response chilled me more than anything I had heard since waking in that healing chamber. "Then you may not survive long enough to rule at all." I did not wait to hear more. I opened the door before caution could stop me, and both men turned toward me in surprise. Doran's expression shifted quickly into something calm and unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. He excused himself with practiced politeness and left without another word, though the warning in his voice lingered in the air long after he disappeared down the corridor. Veltarn assured me it was nothing, though his eyes told a different truth. That night marked the beginning of a tension that would not fade until the very end of everything that followed. Over the next several days, small incidents began piling up in ways too consistent to be coincidence. A guard assigned to Veltarn's personal protection was suddenly reassigned without explanation. Meetings between Veltarn and the Council grew shorter, colder, filled with questions about the human alliance that felt less like curiosity and more like quiet interrogation. Even the healers monitoring my recovery seemed hesitant at times, glancing toward the doorway before speaking freely. Clara noticed the shift as well. During one of her visits, she pulled me aside, her voice low despite the empty room around us. "Something is building here, Daniel. I do not know exactly what, but the court feels different than it did even a week ago. We need to be careful." I agreed, though careful felt like a difficult promise to keep in a palace where danger seemed to hide behind every polished wall and painted ceiling. The truth revealed itself 2 weeks later, during a private council meeting meant to finalize the terms of the treaty between Earth and the Syndral Dominion. Veltarn insisted I attend, both as translator and, though he never said it directly, as a source of quiet reassurance during a meeting he expected to be difficult. The meeting began calmly enough, filled with formal language and careful negotiation, but halfway through, Sarath entered the chamber uninvited, flanked by several guards whose loyalty, I realized with a sinking feeling, no longer belonged entirely to the crown. Sarath's voice carried across the room with practiced confidence. "This alliance has already cost the throne blood. How much more must this family bleed before the council admits its mistake?" Veltarn rose from his seat, his voice steady despite the obvious tension filling the room. "The blood spilled was meant for me, brother. Yet somehow you speak of it as though it were a wound against the throne itself, rather than an attack meant to end my life." The accusation hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment no one moved. Then Doran Vex stepped forward from among Sarath's guards, and in that instant, every piece of the tension building over the past weeks finally clicked into place. "The prince is unfit to rule," Doran announced, his voice cold and certain. "His judgment is clouded by foreign influence. The throne deserves strength, not sentiment." What followed happened faster than I could translate into thought. Guards loyal to Sarath moved to seize control of the chamber, while those still loyal to Veltarn moved to defend him, and for several terrifying moments, the room teetered on the edge of chaos that could have ended in disaster for everyone present. It was Clara, surprisingly, who broke the standoff, her voice cutting through the tension, with a calm authority that surprised even me. "If this council falls to violence today, every treaty, every alliance, every promise of peace between our worlds collapses with it. Is that truly the legacy either of you wish to leave behind?" Her words landed with unexpected weight, and slowly, reluctantly, the tension in the room began to ease. Sarath's guards hesitated, glancing toward their prince for guidance he seemed suddenly unwilling to give. Doran's confidence faltered, as the weight of the council's collective gaze settled fully upon him. In the end, it was not weapons or threats that decided the outcome of that day, but the simple, undeniable truth already spreading throughout the palace, the story of a foreign translator who had chosen, freely and without obligation, to protect a prince with no expectation of reward. That story had already reshaped how the court viewed loyalty, sacrifice, and strength, and in that reshaped understanding, Sarath's argument crumbled beneath its own weight. The council ultimately ruled against him, stripping Doran of his rank and quietly removing him from the palace under guard. Sarath, though publicly humbled, remained a prince still, his ambitions cooled for the moment, but not entirely extinguished. Some battles end cleanly, others simply pause, waiting for their next opportunity. Veltarn's coronation was completed peacefully a month later, the ceremony far quieter than the disaster of the first attempt, though no less meaningful. I stood near the back of the chamber this time, my shoulder fully healed, watching as the crown finally settled upon his head without incident. Afterward, standing together on a balcony overlooking the Syndral capital, Beltarn turned to me with a quiet, thoughtful expression. You could have died that day, he said, for someone you barely knew. I knew you well enough, I answered honestly. Well enough to know you did not deserve to die on the day you were meant to become who you were always going to be. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the golden rooftops stretching toward the horizon. My people will remember this day for generations. Not because a prince was crowned, but because a stranger proved that loyalty does not always require chains to be real. I told him I had never thought of it in such grand terms. I had simply acted, in the moment, without calculation, the way I imagined most people would if given the same impossible choice. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and quiet wonder. Perhaps that is exactly why it mattered so much. The treaty between our worlds was signed formally 3 weeks later, stronger and more trusted than anyone on either side had believed possible, only months before. Clara often joked that history had a strange sense of humor, choosing a quiet translator rather than a soldier or diplomat to become the reason two civilizations finally learned to trust one another. I did not feel like history. I felt like a man who had simply refused to stand still while someone he cared about faced death alone. Perhaps, in the end, that is exactly what history is made of. Ordinary choices, made in impossible moments, remembered long after the fear has faded and only the meaning remains.